Imagine standing on a lonely stretch of sand where the ocean swallows sound. The wind cuts across marshes like a whisper of something unspeakable, and the night hides secrets beneath the dunes. This is Gilgo Beach, Long Island, a place where the waves still crash over graves nobody was meant to find, a place where for years the dead lay buried in burlap while their families waited in silence, and where the hunt for one missing woman opened a door to horror that would not close. It was December 2010, a search for Shannon Gilbert that led police dogs down Ocean Parkway, and what began as a routine patrol ended with bones unearthed, brittle and skeletal, the first body of what would become a sinister catalog of lives, taken and discarded. A chilling revelation that this quiet shoreline had become a burial ground for someone who hunted women like prey. Before the media storm, before courtrooms and DNA battles, there were the women themselves. Real lives, real families, real struggles. Maureen Brainerd Barnes, a 25-year-old mother from Connecticut, juggling low-paid jobs and escort work on Craigslist to keep bills paid. Melissa Barthelemy, 24, a hairdresser from Buffalo who dreamed of more, but found herself walking a dangerous path in New York City. Amber Lynn Costello, 27, a compassionate woman from West Babylon, whose demons never erased the love she held for her family. Megan Waterman, only 22, from Maine, a young mother trying to climb out of hardship, but falling into risky choices. Sandra Castilla, 28, far from her Trinidad and Tobago roots, and trying to build stability in New York before fate turned dark. Jessica Taylor, 20, vulnerable, vanishing from Port Authority into the streets of Manhattan. Valerie Mack, also known as Melissa Taylor, 24, from Philadelphia, whose quiet resilience was no match for the predator who found her. And then the most haunting of all, the toddler later identified as Tatiana Marie Dykes, wrapped in a blanket as though innocence itself had been smothered by cruelty, a child who had no say in a nightmare she could not escape. Their lives, though marked by struggle, carried sparks of hope, phone calls home, small joys, laughter, promises of tomorrow, until those tomorrows were taken, one, by someone who knew how to make them disappear. The nights of their vanishings echo with uncertainty. Maureen disappeared on July 9th, 2007, leaving behind silence on her phone records. Melissa was last seen in July 2009, and in the weeks following, her teenage sister received chilling calls from Melissa's phone, a taunting male voice claiming responsibility before lines went dead. Megan walked out of a Holiday Inn in Hope on June 6, 2010, never to return. Amber vanished on September 2, 2010, after leaving her home to meet a client, her roommate later recalling an ogre-like man in a first-generation Chevy Avalanche who unnerved them both. And Shannon Gilbert, though her case is still debated, disappeared in May 2010 after fleeing a client's home and frantically calling 911 to say someone was chasing her, her voice echoing with terror until the call ended abruptly. When police, searching for her instead, stumbled upon Melissa's skeletal remains wrapped in burlap, buried in thick brush by the parkway, they pulled at a thread that unraveled into a web of horror. Within days, 3 more women, Maureen, Megan, and Amber, all within 500 feet of one another, all discarded like trash, their final resting place chosen not by them, but by the killer who stalked them. This cluster, soon called the Gilgo Four, was only the beginning. In March 2011, more remains surfaced. Jessica Taylor's skull and bones, though part of her body had been found years earlier in Manorville. Weeks later, Valerie Mack's remains, also tied to a Manorville discovery from 2000, identified only in 2020 through genetic genealogy. And then came the small bundle that silenced even hardened detectives. The body of toddler Tatiana, wrapped in a blanket, later matched to her mother, Tanya Denise Jackson, whose bones were scattered nearby. Each discovery deepened the mystery, but also complicated the pattern. Some bodies wrapped in burlap, some dismembered, some intact, some left decades apart, raising a dreadful question. Was this the work of one monster, or several? Investigators in the early days followed every thread. They traced burner phones used to arrange meetings with victims. They combed through Craigslist ads. They mapped cell tower pings, showing victims' phones and possible suspect phones near Gilgo Beach at key times. They interviewed families, piecing together last contacts. They studied the burial sites for patterns of access, theorizing that the killer had intimate knowledge of Ocean Parkway, perhaps a commuter, perhaps a local. They heard of Amber Costello's encounter with the ogre-like man, noted the unusual vehicle, a Chevy Avalanche, and tucked that into their files. They chased leads about Melissa's taunting phone calls, traced them to Midtown Manhattan, Times Square, Madison Square Garden, but the suspect always slipped away before they could close in. Families begged police to see their daughters as more than sex workers, to give them urgency. Critics accused law enforcement of dragging their feet. The case ballooned with pressure, and yet answers never came. Only more bodies. Red herrings flourished like weeds in darkness. Some believed Shannon Gilbert was a central victim of the same killer. Her frantic 911 call proof she was hunted, but police insisted years later that she drowned accidentally in the marsh, muddying the narrative. Others pointed to convicted killer John Bitrolf, whose murders of 2 women in Suffolk County mirrored the Gilgo pattern, raising suspicion he might be responsible for some or all of the victims. Inconsistencies in the bodies, burlap wrappings for some, plastic for others, dismemberment in some cases, but not all, led to theories of multiple killers working independently, yet using the same dumping grounds. The presence of a toddler among adult victims shook investigators, as if the killer's methods made no sense, or there was an entirely different hand involved. Even geography played tricks, with Manorville discoveries tied to Gilgo by DNA, suggesting a killer who shifted locations, changed techniques, or had accomplices. Each apparent lead carried weight until it collapsed. A witness misremembered, a suspect cleared, a confession proven false, an investigator's hunch discredited. For years, the red herrings kept the truth buried as deeply as the bones. Then, decades after some of the killings, a breakthrough surfaced in the unlikeliest way. Science. In 2022, Suffolk County formed a new task force, uniting county police, state police, FBI agents, and prosecutors determined to cut through years of failure. They revisited every clue, giving new life to old tips. The Chevy Avalanche, the burner phones, the taunting calls, the geographic profiling, and they applied forensic technology unavailable in 2010. Rootless hairs, once dismissed as useless, were now tested with whole genome sequencing by a California lab called Astria Forensics, revealing familial connections and pointing back to one man, Rex Hoyerman, a 59-year-old architect from Massapequa Park, married with children, a man who commuted into Manhattan, blending invisibly into city crowds while allegedly hiding monstrous secrets. Investigators tailed him, collected a discarded pizza crust and napkin from a trash can, matching DNA to the hairs found with the victims. They pulled his phone records, finding overlaps with burner phones used to contact the victims. They dug through his digital history and uncovered what prosecutors described as a disturbing planning document, outlining how to abduct, kill, and dispose of victims while evading detection. Witness memories matched his vehicle, his build, his mannerisms, and in July 2023, police descended on his suburban home, charging him with the murders of Barthélemy, Waterman, and Costello, later adding charges for Brainerd Barnes, and eventually indicting him for the killings of Jessica Taylor, Sandra Costilla, and Valerie Mack, 7 victims in total, spanning from 1993 to 2010. The climax unfolded not in a back alley or on a windswept beach, but in a courtroom where the future of justice for these women now hinges on the admissibility of science that itself feels as eerie as the case. Defense lawyers argue that DNA from rootless hairs is unreliable, that secondary transfer could explain why his wife's or daughter's DNA appeared on some remains, that Astria Forensics is not licensed in New York, that the statistical models are unproven. Prosecutors counter that empirical proof validates the methods, that whole genome sequencing can extract truth even from degraded fragments, that multiple hairs from multiple victims pointing back to Hoyerman cannot be coincidence, that the combination of DNA, phone records, vehicle, witness description, and digital evidence is overwhelming. In September 2025, Judge Timothy Mazzei issued a ruling that could reshape forensic law across the nation. He allowed the DNA evidence from rootless hairs tested by whole genome sequencing to be admitted at trial, dismissing the defense's objections and declaring that the science had matured enough to meet legal standards. And so, the case marches toward a climax that is both chilling and uncertain. Will a jury accept this blend of cutting-edge science and circumstantial evidence? Will they see Hoyerman as the architect of these murders, or will doubts about contamination, secondary transfer, and multiple killers leave shadows where clarity should be? Justice or mystery remains. For although indictments now name 7 women whose lives ended violently, other remains still lie in cold files without names. Other families still wonder about daughters never found. And Gilgo Beach still whispers with secrets that waves cannot wash away. Even if Hoyerman is convicted, will that mean all questions are answered? Or will it leave the haunting suspicion that others were involved, that some victims belong to another killer, that the marshes still keep count of bones not yet discovered? Families attend hearings with weary eyes, clutching photos of the young women once full of life, demanding not just convictions, but truth, while the world watches a trial where science, horror, and grief intertwine. In the end, Gilgo Beach is not only a crime scene, it is a reminder that monsters hide in plain sight, that silence can stretch for decades before truth begins to surface, and that even when answers come, the dead do not speak. They only linger in the salt air, waiting for the living to tell their story.